Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Well, welcome back. How many of you out there ever watched, is it called What's Up Carter? What's Up Carter? I don't know. So I'm giving my age away, but I just remember that from that show. And welcome back to another episode of Grief Heals. I've been thinking a lot about grief and loss and love. And one of the things I'm thinking is that we just don't make a lot of space for loss in general as a society overall, so that when we are experiencing loss, we feel like there's something freakish or wrong. But then I'm also thinking about how we put grief in this own specialized category and have these real strict parameters around it. And then what that does to us in our own humanity as we're experiencing whatever we're experiencing. And as I've been thinking about that, I've also thought about what are some of the things that really helped me in the season of my life, because I had experienced, like you, a lot of loss before I really became present to my heart in my loss, right? And I'm like, well, okay, what helped me do that? What did I do that really seemed to make a difference? And I just thought I would share some of those things, because the number one thing that comes to mind is when, in my own experience, when I really felt arrested by grief in a new way. And maybe because I was new in, well, let me just say it this way. When Chip died, I had just gone through a 10-day training on peer support, right? So if you don't know what peer support is, in the context that I went through this training, it was just to become really present to my own lived experience and use whatever I've been through to benefit other people. Okay, so it was a really intense training. And at the time, I was working in an organization that served those without houses. And so we were working with the unhoused, we were working with very vulnerable people in our population. And I, at that season, had just been through when I started working for Path of Life, I'll say, I was really at a low point in my own journey. I had left a marriage of 23 years and I didn't really know who I was, right? It's like, well, who am I if I don't have a Christian label? Who am I if I don't have the label of wife? Who am I if I don't have the label of mom? Because I really, at that season of my life, felt like my mom card, if there is such a thing, had been taken. That was my experience back then. And I was like, oh, I don't relate to my children in the same way. And they were pulling back, right? Which is completely natural. At the time, they were 15, 17, and 18. Their world had been turned upside down. And they really felt like they needed to choose a parent. Okay, so that's where my heart really broke open. Okay, and then fast forward from there, 3 or 4 years later, and my fiance dies. Now, he died. I finished the training I was just telling you, the peer support training, on a Friday. He died that the weekend that we had together was Easter Sunday weekend. And he died on Monday after Easter. Whew. So I was in a really supported place. as supported as I think I could have been for what was to come, because he died suddenly. There was no expectation of death. There was an expectation of a wedding day. Our wedding day was supposed to be 5 months later, and he died. So, what really helped me? Well, there's one thing that I can remember. I would say, and I had been saying it for a couple of years, hey, I'm no longer shitting on myself. I'm not going to shit on me. I'd appreciate it if you don't shit on me. I won't shit on you. Like, could we just have an agreement? No shitting, right? So, I didn't recognize that that principle carried over into my experience of loss. Like, I wasn't being in my experience walking through and saying, well, this is what you're supposed to do, Lisa, and this is what you're supposed to do. And, and I wasn't at the time. You know what? I was thinking about what I'm about to say, because I was going to say I wasn't really caught up in the things I could have done different. And I don't think that part is actually true. So I'm just going to refrain. I'm going to retract that and say that the big thing that I remember is I wasn't shitting on myself. There was another way in which I was really owning my own life and my own experience. And I didn't feel like I wanted other people managing me. Like, when the morning after he died, I can remember I had a strong support system. This was something I did I did a lot of peer support, mental health. And as part of that, I had created a wellness plan for myself way before he died. And in my wellness plan, I had a support network that I wrote down, and I wrote, like, who will I really need when shit hits the fan, when things are not going the way that I prefer, and when I'm leveled in life. And I've had enough experiences in life to know that I've been leveled before. I'll be leveled again, right? Like flattened, like knocked down, and not have my own bearings. So I had already created this awareness within me, written down who I would really need to call to my side in the times of crisis. So I say that because the morning after he died, and in part, like, when I found out it was midnight, I was in shock, and I sent out almost like a mass text message that said, my fiance died. He loved me. I think that's what it said. And when I eventually fell asleep, 3, 4 o'clock that morning, and I woke up to a house full of women, like 7 women were at my side. And I highly recommend creating a support system for yourself, some sort of idea of, like, hey, if I were in the hospital, who would check my mail, who would feed my dog, who would I really want to be able to bare my heart to? Like, just get mindful about the people in your community that you can call on in times of trouble, right? Who will you turn to? So, why do I say that? I just lost my train of thought. Not a problem. I'm just going to take a breath. I'm letting my exhale be longer than my inhale. Just returning to my own precious self. So I had a work buddy at the time, and Christy had everything navigated. Like, literally by 7 o'clock that morning, she had called my boss. She had stepped in and said she would cover any meetings that I needed to be handling in our community. She even offered to do a training that I was scheduled to do on creating a wellness plan, oddly enough, for another organization. Like, there were just several things she had already figured out by 7 o'clock in the morning. But one of the things that happened is I'm in the other room. I'm obviously devastated. I don't know what I just don't know. I don't have words even now to say what it was like then to find out that the man that I was planning to do life with for the rest of my life was dead. Like that's just, and I could hear them whispering in the other room, this group of women, and I did not know what they were saying. But what I did know is it involved me, and it was in some way that they were planning to take care of me. And I remember yelling out to them, nothing about me without me. So, this is what I mean by I had this real sense of no, my life is my life. And you're not going to make plans for my life. Who's going to drive me? Who's going to take my car? Who's going to, like, they had all these thoughts of what I would or would not be able to do for myself. And it was well intended and it was beautiful and nothing about me without me. Like I get to be present, making decisions in my own life, no matter how devastated I am. And when I said that, I went into the other room and I addressed them, and it was actually a relief to them. And it was a bonding experience. Like it was just a beautiful bonding experience. I almost said a cliche like no other. No, I've had bonding experiences just as deep, just as profound. And this was a deep and profound bonding experience. So far, no shitting on myself or shitting on my grief, and no shitting or representing me, like really still being present to my life. Um, and then there is one thing I think I'll share here because it was not long after he died that I met the man that I am now married to. In fact, it was very soon after. That is an area that I did shit on myself because I was very confused about what this meant. I was confused about what it meant about me. I questioned my sense of self and who I believe myself to be. I questioned the love, like, what does this mean about the love that I had for my fiance? What did it mean about what we had in our relationship, the depth of it, the validity of it, all the things? And I really, at that point, felt like I was in hiding. And I felt very separate from myself. And then I read a quote by Brene Brown. I must have been reading one of her books. I've read several of her books. One of the things she said, I wish I could remember which book I was reading. You either, this is Brene Brown quote, you either stand inside your story and own it, or you stand outside of your story and you hustle for worthiness. And when I read that quote, it was like something within me, like I'm picturing a locksmith, and you can picture a locksmith turning the lock until it drops. And this is it. I'm going to open this. I'm in the reality that is needed to open this door, right? Like the lock is, and that is what happened within me. Is I read that quote, you either stand inside your story and own it, or you stand outside of your story and you hustle for worthiness. Well, I felt like I had been outside of my own story most of my life, and really taking myself around like, will you love me? Will you love me? Will you love me? And if I felt like the answer was no, or it became no, then that was just a loop I'd been running. It was a habituated pattern of thinking and feeling. And it was a program that had been running my whole life. I did not even know that that was something that could totally be interrupted, changed, and a new program, if you will, installed. Okay. So I had really, at this season of life, been taking more and more ownership of my own story. And here I was in this new way, now standing as an outsider to my experience. And, I was reading a lot about grief at the time and about the way grief changes the brain and different things that happen. And so I didn't know if my experience, the romantic experience, what I was feeling toward this man that is now my husband, I was afraid it wasn't real. And I also had an old story for a long time that I, in some way, wasn't real, right? And one of the things that I have come to learn and appreciate about grief is I feel like grief is a messenger. Grief is somebody, I'm going to personify grief, somebody who comes alongside and says, hey, you are hurting. Your heart feels broken. And I want to bring love and minister a balm of healing and integration to your precious heart. When I read that quote, somehow in an instant, I became present to the way that I was standing outside of my story. I became like I could physically feel myself as if I was disembodied. And then I came like as if there was a ghost behind me that came and inhabited my body. So all of me was fitted back together. And then when I did that, the way that I made it real for myself is I began contacting the people that are very precious to me that I did not feel I could tell what was happening in my life. And that was a level of freedom, and it took the shoulds off in a whole new way. So in my present day experience, I have a teacher. I love her. Her name is Melissa Tiers. Melissa Tiers, Tiers. I started working with her because I know that so much of what I do and we do as just people is influenced, like 98% influenced, 95%, but up there by our subconscious. And I wanted to really know more completely how to access the subconscious, how to work with the subconscious, so I've been working with Melissa, and I am so utterly grateful that I made that choice. I'm grateful for me as just a beautiful woman in this body having this experience. And I am so grateful for those that I work with and influence and get to lead and guide and all the things, because I have greater access to knowing what is going on inside myself and inside others. And when I say that, what I really mean is I have greater access to explore on purpose and access the subconscious in a way that brings present not only what's getting in the way, but what it is that we are desiring for ourselves, right? Now, how in the heck did I get here? Because I was just telling you something. And now it's okay. It's just escaped just a little tiny bit. So Melissa has helped me with some other tools in accessing my subconscious. And it was actually looking at some of the things I've learned with Melissa and asking myself, how was I already doing that unwittingly? and not unwittingly. I almost got redundant. I almost said and not knowing it. Okay, so what was I doing that I didn't know I was doing that was really helpful to my experience? Well, one, I've already shared, I wasn't shooting on myself. And that right there, when we add guilt to our pain, that is just like, so when I was talking about the old program, the old story of come back to me, come back to me. I already shared with you one of the old stories that I had, like, oh, that I'm not real. That's just a story. It's a hallucination. I even think I know where it came from, right? Just some things that were said to me when I was a itty bitty. Okay, but who cares? It's still a story. So I was owning new aspects of a new story. And the not shooting on myself was part of having a new story for myself, lighting up a whole new neural network cluster so that I could create a new experience in my body. Well, then the other thing, when I said, so I said I didn't shoot on myself, and then the autonomy. Well, I already gave you the example of nothing about me without me. Another thing I did, I went to a therapist. And when I went to the therapist, I was really there regarding my grief. He had been dead, I want to say a week. And this therapist that I went to started asking me about my childhood immediately. And I literally felt like he was using a form, a checklist to just, click boxes as he took me through this. And I was attentive to my body and to what was happening in my body, right? And it took me about, I don't know, 3, 5 minutes. And then I looked at him and I began standing up and I said, "Ooh, you are not meeting me where I'm at. This is not going to work because I know where I'm at and that's not what's interesting you. You're fired." I was very abrupt, but I felt that sense of I was being treated like I needed to fit into some sort of formula, and it felt so good to be taking ownership of my process. And one of the things that I think happens in our grieving experiences, whether it is the loss of a loved one, whether it's a divorce or the loss of a dream, I think this happens where we've been conditioned to think that somebody knows better than we do. We go to the experts for everything we need. Our society is designed for the experts. Okay, so I've got a legal matter, I go to the lawyer. I've got a physical matter, I go to the physical therapist. I go to the hospital. I go to this, I go to that. I'm not saying good, bad, yay, nay, right, wrong, none of that. What I'm saying is there's this sense in which the authorities have the answer and we forget. I literally think it's less that we forget and more even, this is just my opinion, that we've been conditioned away from trusting ourselves, from trusting the authority that is rightfully ours, that's been deposited within us. Whew. So coming back and recognizing, hey, there's not a right way to grieve. I'm not meant to fit into 5, stages. I'm not meant to fit into your formula of how to address me. I'm not meant to, like, that sense of autonomy, because I will say, in my experience, I've experienced a few sudden deaths in my life. My sister died suddenly when I was in my 20s. She had an asthma attack in the middle of the night. Um, it's just becoming a little alive in my body right now. My peapod died suddenly by suicide when I was actually even younger, when I was 13. My fiance died in a motorcycle accident, and then my father was hit by a car. Um, I've also experienced losses that were more, you know, I want to put air quotes, but like expected. I was going to say planned. That's why I felt like air quotes were warranted, but expected, right? Like when my Mima was dying of lung cancer, I was anticipating her death in some sort of way. Maybe it's true of all of these deaths. It was so disorienting. I felt such a loss of control. I felt such a loss of a collapse, maybe, of the world as I know it. The end of the world as we know it. Like it was just like an utter collapse, right? Why am I telling you that? I think when in the midst of that we add guilt or shame or shoulds to our grief, that further adds to the sense of uncertainty, of loss of control. And also when we give over our experience to others telling us how we're supposed to be, um, that too can be very disorienting and add to the experience of already being disoriented. So I think that the owning my experience and nothing about me without me, firing that therapist. There's one other thing that comes to mind. And please know that there is nothing I am telling you that is prescriptive, right? This is not like, oh, but now let me tell you how to do something. No, no, no. I am offering you my experience, knowing, believing that your brain is going to offer you new ideas through this of just, oh, how do I get to own, get to experience my self authority in this situation? How do I get to release shoulds? Where are the shoulds showing up? What would I prefer instead, right? So I was working when Chip died, and like many of you, there was not a long like bereavement period. I went back to work in less than a week, and everyone treated me different. And it wasn't like one way of treating me different. There were several ways of treating me different. So um, people looked at me with this like, somber, sullen face, like they were expecting me to perform some sort of, I don't know, grief antics on command. Some people avoided me. Some people avoided talking about what happened as if I didn't know. Some people now, I could have hallucinated this whole thing. In many ways I did, because all it is my perception, right? My perception is not like the way it is, truth with a capital T. It's my experience. So another experience I had was that sometimes I felt like people might look at me funny if I was laughing too hard. So I wrote a letter. At the time, I had a position in the company where I basically interacted with everyone, no matter where your position was in our organization. I was connecting with you in some kind of way. So I wrote a letter to our entire organization, and I think maybe we had 50 people, 50 employees. So, like, not huge, huge, maybe a little more than that. And I wrote a letter addressing everyone and just letting them know how I preferred to be treated. And I asked our CEO, and he let me send it out, company wide. And basically, I don't have a copy of the letter. I'd actually love to see what I wrote because it was so fresh. It was so fresh. I remember saying something like this: I am human, and I am the same Lisa Michelle that you've known the whole time you've worked with me. And my heart is broken. and I will cry when I need to cry. And I will laugh at jokes and I will even tell jokes. And I would love it if you would do your best to just treat me like you've always treated me, knowing that I've experienced a tremendous loss and I am carrying Chip close to my heart. You don't have to pretend that it didn't happen. You don't need to change the subject. If I want to talk about him, I'll talk about him, right? Like you can ask me, whatever. Just can you please treat me like a person? And I'm just going to take a quick aside and say that is actually how I ended up with the man that I currently am with. We were part of a club. He was brand new to it, and my fiance and I had been part of the club for, I don't know, 3 years, I want to say. And he did not know Chip. He had met him one time. So while the people in the club didn't quite know how to treat me either, I didn't need to write him a letter. He just treated me like I was funny, like I was normal, like everything was okay, and that everything wasn't okay. And like both could be true and it wasn't a problem. And that was so refreshing. It was refreshing. It was magnetizing. And that's how we ended up having conversations, right? It wasn't romantic. It was like he just felt like a comfortable place for me to land where I could just talk and be me. And he didn't treat me like he needed to caretake me. And yet he didn't treat me like it wasn't actually happening, that I had not just lost my fiance. So that combination was really, really, really beautiful. So there's a couple things now. I brought up Melissa earlier, and I just want to offer a couple of things that she's offered that I think will also help. Oh, you know what? There's one other thing I did for myself that I think was tremendous, because like many of you, even when our hearts just hurt and we feel like not knowing how to just do the thing we need to do in front of us, in my case it was work, I needed to know that my grief had a date. Like by date I mean like I made a date with my grief. I did it unwittingly. It just kind of started and then it became a thing. So it was not something I planned to do, and yet I found it incredibly helpful. I would get home from work and I would just start writing. And I would write to him about my day. I would write to him what was going on for me, what I was thinking. If I was angry at him, I would write to him about that. If I was just feeling my sadness, I would just write about whatever was going on for me. And I ended up writing a lot of thank yous, love letters to him. But I mean, there were times that I think I stabbed my pen into the paper, because I recognized that by writing him, like he was still here. He was here differently, but he was still here, and I could still have a conversation. And I will say, to this day, we have a relationship, right? And I'm talking about my dead fiance, but I do have a present day, very different, but a present day relationship with him. And actually, interacting with him has helped me to interact more with my sister, to interact more with my dad, to interact with the people that I love who are not here in the same way. In fact, I never met my biological father. And now I've begun having conversations with him in this new way. And look, when we're in relationship, so much of what happens in that relationship is made up, because you know what I'm talking about? Like, we think, oh, the intention that they had was, just imagine anybody you're in relationship with, a friend, a partner, a work colleague. We tend to make up what the other person is thinking. We're having in some ways a fantasy relationship because we don't really know, right? In some ways it's all made up. So I've entered and built more of a relationship with my dad. And I say it's all made up. And there's this spiritual element, this knowing inside of me where it just feels it works for me. It works for me. So I also offer you that of just allowing ourselves to have conversations with our people, to complete anything that was not complete while they were here. That's actually a lot of the work, part of the work that I do with people that I work with specifically, who are grieving a loss of some kind. But then there was something else that Melissa offered, because one of the things, we can get so micro focused on that experience. And just think about that. If you even take your hands and you cup them around your eyes and you look forward, right? Like there's part of your vision that is blocked. And so if you can imagine bringing your hands away, away, away from your eyes, right? Like if you do this in the room that you're in, you'll start to notice your peripheral vision, and it widens your experience. So think about this. What is everything that is not this loss? What is everything that is not this loss? Now, what you're essentially doing is you are widening that vision, and you're widening your experience, right? So I am not suggesting that we do not honor our losses. And I am suggesting that we can widen our experience. We can even ask what, and I well, in all of this, in anything I offer, only work to your comfort level. You know what's best for you. You know what's working and what's not working based on how it feels, how you experience it. So you can also ask, what am I not seeing that is my person, that is my longing, that is the dream in my heart? What's everything I'm not seeing that is or holds my person, that is what I'm longing for, right? So we can do this, and as we do, we end up playing with different parts of our brain. And when we play, like, we light up different hemispheres in the brain. So we're so used to lighting up the left hemisphere with our cognitive brain. As we light up the right hemisphere, we help our brain have an integrated experience, and that also supports us. So I think I will just stop right here, right now. Ask you to take a breath with me. So breathing in slowly and filling that belly, and then on the exhale, letting the exhale be twice as long. You want to do that together? So breathing in, letting the exhale be longer. One more time, breathing in and out. Okay, thank you for having another conversation with me. If you are in a position to do so and a hug feels good, I invite you to widen your arms. If you want a hug, but you cannot spread your arms out, just imagining that I and we are hugging you, so wrapping around and squeezing tight and letting yourself feel that you can hold and be held. You are holding and you are held. All right. Mwah. Until next time.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Candelian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at Lisa Michelle at legitu.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.